There we go. Looks like we're live.
I think so. Okay, terrific. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It is April 1st, Climate Solutions Caucus meeting. And we have, we might as well jump right into it. We have, first of all, I want to say thank you to folks in the House for doing some great work. Always important to celebrate our accomplishments, even in this strange and special Zoom universe, where we have passed a budget with significant, you have passed a budget, significant climate investments, $35+ million in weatherization. We passed the Transportation Modernization Act. What else are we celebrating? What else is moving that we've been talking about? Help me out. Gabrielle.
Well, hopefully soon we'll discuss the contractor registration bill that's been mentioned a couple of times here, hopefully next week on the House floor.
Terrific.
Don't forget broadband.
Yes, broadband, an essential climate infrastructure. Selena, Representative Colburn.
Oh, I was going to say also just say 157 when it comes up will be important. That's been a priority for a long time, and it hit a little bit of a snag in Ways and Means, but then ultimately found its way, and hopefully folks will support it. And my understanding is the presenter, it's going to be just delayed till next week, not because of the bill, anything about the bill, but just the presenter is having a little bit of a COVID vaccine reaction. So don't be, don't just because it did get hung up a little bit on its way to the floor. I want to make sure everybody understands that it's not the delay in coming to a vote it has nothing to do with the bill.
Got it. Representative Dolan. Carrie.
Hi, thank you. I also wanted to mention that the bottle bill is a climate bill.
Sure.
When we talk about recycling, we're talking about closed loop recycling. We currently recycle only less than half the available beverage containers, and closed loop recycling, as opposed to recovery, which assumes just a single final use, reduces in a major way the fossil fuels associated with the manufacturing of beverage containers, whether it be aluminum, glass, or other products. So I want to flag that that's a fundamental value of this bottle bill is the climate benefits. Looking at the full life cycle cost of a beverage container.
That's a great point. Thank you. Tell me, can someone remind us what bill number that is for those of us on the Senate side?
175.
And as I understand it, our redemption system was set up by the industry in the 70s and is anything but efficient. So in addition to bringing in more containers and the production benefits you're talking about, Carrie, we also potentially should save fossil fuels in the way it's being collected. And you have Pepsi driving next to the Coca-Cola truck to get their own bottles, and it's been very inefficient, as I understand.
Well, that may be true, but it reminded me of another added benefit. The national beverage industries are moving towards using recycled materials in their plastics and other containers. California just passed a bill, for example, and it's supported by some of the large national beverage industries that will require or currently require and will increase the percentage of recycled materials in their plastic bottles, for example. And the absolute requirement for this is to have clean material. So that too will help reduce, not only it's a climate issue, it's also a a litter and environmental issue, because we see that this is the future, being able to use recycled materials in the next generation of beverage containers.
Terrific. Maury, did you have something to add, Representative Cordes?
Yes, I do. The H108, which Representative Dolan and I introduced, and Representative Dolan reported on the House floor, ensuring that wetlands were, specific classes of wetlands were updated to be clearly protected in the Vermont Water Quality Standards, which has also the impact of not only protecting them, as we know, as resources for resilience and sequestration, but also for more oversight protection related to potential federal, through the federal process, applications for interstate fossil fuel pipelines. So that's H108, and that did pass out of the House, and we're hoping.
Oh God, I don't need more. I'm stuck.
Tommy, you're not needed. We're hoping that Senate Natural Resources will move on that. And then I just want to mention that the UVM student interns working with Representative James and myself will be reaching out to legislators to help them catalog all the bills that have any link to climate in whatever way. And we're going to include in that probably a Google Sheet, a column for whether or not there was federal money linked to it.
Great.
So keep your eyes open for communications. Kathleen and I, we can send you all an email so you know who to look for.
All right, thank you. That's a terrific segue into where we want to go today. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and input. So we invited Steve Klein, as everybody knows, director of JFO, to come help us start to understand the federal money that is coming down the pipeline here, $900 million, if I'm not mistaken. We know that we don't know all of the permissive uses. Maybe we don't know any of them. But Steve, what we'd like to do, we've talked about in this group a lot, is to make sure that as we're making those investments, to the extent possible, we're able to get double duty of a pandemic relief, economic relief, and a climate infrastructure or a climate benefit to help as the state wrestles with climate change and shifting away from fossil fuels. So if you're able to just spend some time helping to set the table on the money and your understanding of permissive uses and the timeline and anything like that, it would be a great benefit as we try to then brainstorm on our own and with interested groups and citizens and municipal leaders, et cetera, on how we might build some of these priorities into those dollars. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Steve Klein, and thanks for taking some time to be with us.
Thank you. Yeah, and so what I'll do is, if it makes sense, is I'll spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes just go over things and then really focus on questions, and that way we can get closer to what you all want to hear. So we're a very unusual time, and we've had the CRF money, we now have the ARPA money, and then we're now looking at an infrastructure bill, which will also provide a fair amount of money for buildings. I mean, and they look at 2 million homes and commercial buildings are being talked about in the infrastructure package that's being developed now. But the one before us right now is what is it? The ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. And of that, the state is getting about $1.052 billion, and local governments are getting $182 million. So schools are getting $380 million. So there's really opportunities at all levels for schools, for local governments, and for the state to make investments that are in the line is what you're talking about. On climate issues, the state has been funding through CRF a lot of money for schools, for HVAC systems and things like that. There'll probably be some more of that in the I think there's a proposal to add 15 million to that. But the schools can also do it on their own, and so can local governments. And it's something to think about as you do we take the state resources and use it as a match? Do we do things we can't control what they do, but maybe we can create sort of an environment where there's some local pressures on schools and on the municipalities to use the money creatively to achieve the types of goals that you care about. The federal money, as you know, all arrived in March. And one of the concerns is it actually hasn't arrived here in Vermont. It's the bill passed. We expect the money to arrive sometime in June. So what's happening is there's a bill called House 315 that passed the House and the Senate and is now going back from the House to the Senate that does some preliminary appropriations in ARPA money just to get things started. There's also in the budget that the House passed, there's 20 million for weatherization. There's a number of sort of attempts to use this ARPA money in the directions that you're talking about, with the caveat that we're anticipating receipts. It's not here yet. We're doing so on there's certain things that bill does very clearly state, like it states that money can be used for water, sewer, and broadband. So you'll see fairly major investments in broadband, 150 million, 100 million for water and sewer. But things like weatherization, we think that there's going to be eligibility, but we don't really know. So what you're seeing 20 million put into weatherization in the budget. And the plan is to put some money out now, start getting the process going. Also, there's some money in the bill to the budget to provide training for weatherizing type people, because one of the things we know we're going to need over the next few years is a workforce that can carry out some of these functions. And sort of we're trying to get sort of create the capacity to really manage what we think will be a fairly major financial funding down the road. And I would just think one thing you want to think about as a caucus is just how do we make sure that we create that capacity so when the money does come in, not just the ARPA money, but also this new federal dollars, we can take advantage of it to the greatest extent possible in accomplishing what you do. So one of the things the House did, which I think the governor is going to do next week, and the Senate will probably do, is they're talking about the ARPA money. How do we set sort of parameters or fences around chunks of it? And you'll see the House put 150 into broadband. They put 100 million in clean water. They've got 250 million for making communities strong, 100 million for IT. And while we've only spent 20 million on weatherization, maybe there's an argument for creating essentially a fence around some money for energy and weatherization type projects where you're not really spending it yet. You're saying, we want so much of the money to go to this purpose. And you don't really spend it until January when you actually have the regs in place where you know what you can use it for. But you're starting to carve out, you're chunking it up a little bit. And I think we'll see probably when the governor submits their proposal for chunking it up, maybe some more in that area. Because what happened when the year started, the governor put 20 million of weatherization money in general fund. Now it's in the ARPA money. And in this bill, we put some sort of safeguards. If it's not eligible, there's some general fund available to cover, and move money around a little bit. But we're in the early stages. We're spending it on things that we think are spendable, that we can cover. We're moving into the gray areas a little bit, but we're also putting sort of frames around where we'd like to go with the money, with the understanding that when you come back in next year, you'll really be able to allocate it. So that's maybe, boy, that's quick. I can go into lots of details, but just to I'll give you one more example. As I said, the clean water, broadband, and sewage was directly mentioned. The other activity is really under this clause. It says to respond to the public health emergency with respect to coronavirus disease, COVID-19, or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or AIDS impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. So that language isn't really directly like weatherization. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest things is not for housing. So, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, weatherization is really can be considered a negative it can be considered assistance to households and that have been affected by this. So we're
Right.
sort of fitting it under the tent a little bit here, putting the nose on the tent, but it's a little risky right now until we get to see the regs to go too deep into that. So that's why you're seeing this sort of, in the olden days, 20 million wouldn't feel like a tentative little thing, but it's an attempt to move in that direction with the knowledge that we really are waiting for guidance to really know how big we can push that language.
Terrific. There's going to be some questions, Steve, but I have a couple that I'm sure will help everybody. What are there anything that's expressly prohibited
Yes.
that we can help frame us?
They don't really relate to your area as much, but you cannot spend any of this money on pensions.
Okay.
And so that's
It relates to the general fund. Okay.
yeah, and it's a sad prohibition, because one of the things that the federal government or Congress was very happy about was that they provided 85 billion to private pension funds, and they talked about that and how important that was and how it was multi-employer, single employer plans, and then they put this language in saying that pension funds, no state or territory may use funds made available under the section for deposit in any pension fund. So that was sort of a little mean, actually. Then there's also, you cannot use it for tax cuts, and that's become something that has created a little furor, because 22 attorney generals are suing the federal government for not letting them use it in that way. And we think it's going to resolve. The only reason it's a real concern is some of the suits are saying that none of the money should be distributed to anybody until we get this resolved. So I think it's going to be resolved and it's not going to be a problem, but there's that very small likelihood that something, like that could create havoc in our lives.
Okay.
Those are the two that are very specifically prohibited. And the same language is in both ours and the municipal money too. So.
Okay. And give us a sense of the timeline. The CARES money was a very aggressive timeline that then got extended. Where does this start out at?
That's a really good question, because the CARES money, you're right, and they only gave us 7 months. So then now it's extended till next December. So it's still alive and kicking for a while longer. This money starts off by giving us 3.5 years. So we have till December 2024. The school money is also in that same ballpark. I think it's October 2024. It says in the law October 2023, 1023, but there's something called the Tidings Amendment that does apply, which says where education money comes in, you get it for a year beyond, what's officially in the law. So yeah, it's 3.5 years worth of money.
And one last question, we'll turn it over to Gabrielle. Things like there is some money going directly to schools, directly to the towns. Do we have any input on that, or is that just straight to their coffers?
It's pretty straight to their coffers. What we're trying to do, one thing that came up in the Senate, and the Senate did, and the House is going to do part of it, is we're trying to ensure there's some technical assistance to municipalities through the regional planning entities and through maybe VLCT to ensure that towns use their money in wisely. So, maybe we can influence what they do, but we have no direct control over what they do. One other thing I just want to flag on the schools, the same thing. There was proposal to do technical assistance to schools and how to use it, because the last thing you want to do is have them build long-term obligations and use it in ways that create needs, because this money is going to end. And one of the concepts of the money going to end that's really important is, while we have it for a lot of years, and we also have this other bill that's being considered, and it'll affect both the healthcare area and infrastructure, it's going to stop at some point. Well, I don't know if that's true, but the assumption is the federal government is not going to do this forever. And so that's problem A, that 24 will arrive and we'll have less money. The second thing that's happening, and is equally important, is the availability of the CRF money. We had over $1 billion of that. Now we have $1 billion of this. And those are in packages that have really been about $3 billion. So we've had about $12 billion impacting the economy through the bills that we've received so far. That has tremendously affected the general fund and the ed fund and our state resources. So what you're seeing is not only do we have federal resources for a limited period of time, we have our state revenues are picking up that same sort of bump in revenues for a limited period of time. And so we're going to see through a period of time, I would say, 23, 4, and 5, you're going to see whatever the economy does, you're going to see a fairly normal tightening going on in resources all around. So one of the concepts being talked about is just as much as we want to spend the money really wisely now to accomplish as much as we can, we need to set aside reserves for the time when you're really going to be in a tough fiscal situation.
Right, when it constricts.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gabrielle, you've been very patient. Representative Stebbins, what's your question?
Thank you. And please take this comment two-part. First of all, I'm a new legislator. And second of all, I'm living in House Committee on Transportation. So, but you are, in all of the money conversations. And so I have a sort of a three-part question. One is, I'm hearing a lot of, different entities, different nonprofits, different advocacy organizations saying, we need this much, we need this much, in, specifically in different committee rooms.
Mhm.
And my question is, from your perspective, are you seeing sort of, an overall strategic plan for how to make sure that we use these dollars as wisely as possible? And that very well may be happening. I just, in my House Transportation Committee room, I'm not privy to being in every committee at all the times. So that was my first question. And if there is, or if there isn't, how can we, where are there ways in which we might build upon that further, to your point that 2024 will come along? And then my third question is, we do have some, like the State Infrastructure Bank, we have VITA with, we have a variety of, through ACCD, revolving loan programs that I would love to figure out how we can, and if we can, use, at least a portion of these funds, and apply them in a manner that we can reuse them, and not just sort of once and done. So sort of threefold question, what your general vantage point is, if you think we can improve upon how we're going about this, and if so, what would you suggest? And third, some thoughts in terms of revolving, how do we keep the dollars going rather than once and done?
So I'll do it in reverse order, and then I don't know what order I'll do them in, but the revolving loan fund is a no-no, because this money goes away. And so, obviously the world may change, the federal government may change, but to the extent that they say, you have to spend this money by December 24, if we take it and put it in a revolving fund and it revolves for a longer period of time, that's not what's allowed when you're, that's not the same thing. That's putting it into something where it'll keep going. And so we really have to think of this as money that we have to spend in a time certain. So anything that involves revolving money has been sort of said, right now we're in a no version to that. Granted, the regulations when they come out might free that up, but what we're sort of looking at is what's green, what's sort of a gray area that we can sort of live with, and what sort of at this point feels red. Like we can't put money in pension funds, but and so I think what you'll see is more use of the gray area as we know what the federal law, if they say revolving funds are fine, you'll watch that happen. Right now, I would say that's way too gray to do at this time. The strategic plan, I'm just going to jump that one. The House began that process, and they sort of laid out a plan for $650 million of where they'd like to see the money go. And they talked in terms of broadband, of building the IT capacity of the state. They talked in terms of clean water and strengthening communities. The Senate will have we've been told the governor next week is going to have their own sort of version of how to use this money in big chunks. And I guess one of the things you're saying is, and I think would make sense is, when the Senate does this, or and what'll happen is the House did it, the governor will throw out his 2 cents, and then the Senate will do it, and then there'll be a reconciliation between the House and Senate of where it goes. Is, maybe one of the things to put out is that a certain percentage of that should be used for weatherization or for clean energy or implementation of the, to the extent that it's eligible and COVID related, and we can fit in the bill, for the global warming type of financing things, that looking for that nexus and, helping to create that sort of overall strategic use that we all have to tie it into COVID pandemic expenses. Everything's tied in there, but to look for those opportunities. So I would say, you're totally right. There needs to be a plan. This is a limited amount of money, and well, it feels unlimited right now, but it is a limited amount of money, and it's temporary. We want to use it to take advantage of this time to make as much change as possible. But as we develop over the next, I would say, month, sort of basic shells of how to use the money, you might as well have your concepts in there too. So that would be the answer. And I think that's the build on that too, but I'm not sure. So maybe I should let you follow up if that isn't right.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? I could ask questions all day if the group is shy. All right, until I see a hand. Avram, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to something Steve had said in terms of in the Energy and Technology Committee, the broadband bill, before ARPA happened, we had a much, much smaller amount of money in it for to be used by communication union districts through VETA loans. And when we suddenly had the opportunity to move that up to $150 million in discussions with the Appropriations Committee, we got the advice that you've heard from JFO that it needs to be grants, not loans. So at this point, I mean, we're still waiting to see and wanting to confirm whether that proves to be true. But that's was our understanding as the bill passed to the Senate.
Thank you for that. And for people that are watching, most of us who've been through the legislature for a while, if we have an idea that costs $2 million or $500,000, we're hoping that we can do it, or that people can agree that it's a priority. And so we are existing in a pretty strange universe where suddenly people are saying, how about 150 million? It is pretty wild. Mike Antachka, what's your question?
Yeah, so just wondering if Steve can maybe identify some areas that we would normally use general fund money for, that we could use the ARPA money for, and free up some general fund revenues for use in some of these other things like revolving loan funds and pensions and things like that.
Yeah, and so that you'll see a lot of that in the House bill. And as you know, the House bill came with 150 million put aside for pensions. Well, and that was general fund, because what happened was things like the money for the weatherization was moved into the ARPA funds. And then another big area that moved into ARPA was workforce training. I think there was close to 20 million in workforce training money, and some of the transitional money for the Vermont State Colleges was moved into the ARPA money, and a lot of the money for VORAC, for the parks and recreation areas, and trying to get natural areas up to speed, because a lot of people in the pandemic have been using our parks a lot more. There's been a lot of using of open space, and there was a governor proposed using general fund to really increase the capacity of those facilities to meet the needs of Vermonters. And then there was also a proposal to deal with brownfields, and a lot of that has been put into ARPA. But again, there's this caveat that I think we've been trying to keep from being too aggressive, but they set aside 38 million in case some of that falls away at the wayside. But you're exactly right. As we get this direction, as the regs come in, we're going to know where else we can put this ARPA money. And to the extent that we can put the ARPA money in places where it's totally legitimate by the federal regulation and it gives us more general fund capacity, then we free up general fund for all the things that you're talking about. And so I think that's a really good point, because there's really two things we're doing. One is, where can we use ARPA money, and what can we, in reserving some of that money for your priorities? And the second question is, if general fund is freed up, what are the types of things that we can use it for? And so it comes back to the question that was asked a few minutes ago about just planning. We're really if there's ever a time when you really want to think about strategic planning for the state and putting this all together, it's now, because we have this phenomenal amount of money. The guidance will be coming through in the next 6 months, and you have this infrastructure bill, which could be as much as another 500 million on the broadband area coming in. And then you have, another bill that may affect human services. So it's the capacity to think creatively and to plan. Going back to what Senator Pearson said, we're all in a world that we don't normally. I'm in a world saying, don't spend that, raise taxes, we need money, and don't spend anything. But right now we're in such a different world that probably what we really have to do is think strategically about how do we use it. With the one caveat, and I guess this is where you were on that I wanted to make, is advocates are really pushing to get this money, but the real important issue here from me is that this is temporary money. And you can't really use this money to build fill ongoing base needs. And I think that there'll be tremendous pressure to do that. But the more you do that, the more you're putting yourself in a pretty serious problem a few years out. So that's been probably the first response, and one of the more difficult responses to advocates is that
Yeah, and I'm confident that the Appropriations Committee is getting this advice as well, and is working with it.
Yeah.
One thing that occurred to me is that we do have workforce availability issues, and this with the kind of work we're proposing in things like broadband and other infrastructure improvements, it could be a very a means of attracting people to Vermont that are currently outside of Vermont. If we don't have enough line workers to build broadband now, then, the work's there. And if we're willing to spend the money on it, we can attract them from other places.
Yeah.
And Mike's question makes me think, if the revolving loan is always attractive to us, can't use ARPA money there, but we could use ARPA money for a grant and match it with a revolving loan that we set up with general fund dollars that we've freed up. So I want people to think about not just the ideas, but some of the creative financing. Molly Burke, Representative Burke, we're going to go to you. And then I think we'll probably, unless any last minute questions come up, we'll let Steve go and do a little bit of our own work. Molly.
Hi, Steve. I know the infrastructure bill hasn't passed yet, but as you're talking about planning, it seems like it's going to be really important to not only figure out how to deploy that, but also to know, like, if we do this, what will that mean in terms of cutting our emissions? And, very specific numbers. What do we need to do to invest in electric vehicles, in electrification in general, in deployment of charging stations, all of that. So it's just really good to be thinking ahead about that and getting some analyses ahead of time. Thank you.
I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement. I'll leave it as a statement unless there's something I can.
Yeah, maybe we'll ask for some analyses, like what would we need to do, like specifically, not just throw it in one, in a few places, but figure out where would be the most benefit in terms of actual carbon emissions reduction.
Yeah, I would think that you've set up this whole climate commission that's really trying to figure that out. I would think they would be the lead on that. It's a complex situation because, most of the decisions about the money will be made after January when we actually have the regs in place. And so A, we don't know what the money can be used for. B, we're in a very weird time right now, as you all know, because the roads we're driving a lot less now. And what's happening in the environment, we're seeing the pandemic has created some positive environmental impacts in the temporary basis. So planning and understanding the long-term nature of our, what different things can buy, what it'll do to the impacts, it's pretty complex right now. We're in a very sort of uncertain, there's been some big changes in just how things interact. So, but I think probably the lead on that, and I could be wrong, is that the commission you all established.
Climate Council.
Yeah.
Okay, Mari, last question. Is your question for Steve?
Maybe for a comment. I'm glad that, Steve, that you brought up the Climate Council, and just to highlight that there are some concerns by advocates and folks from around the state about making sure that the process we're using to catalog not just carbon but greenhouse gases is comprehensive, and that there is some concern about the direction that the climate counselors going. So if anyone's interested in that, it would be good to follow up.
Okay. I don't mean to jump in, but we've got some work to do. And
Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's a great primer to our conversation here. So thank you so much. What Sarah and I were thinking, Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would love to. So what we saw as a process 2 summers ago now of Climate Caucus breaking itself into groups that are more focused on a particular task or policy area was really helpful. And given that there's so much that we don't know about the way we can use the money that is on its way here, and also what we don't know about the landscape of the infrastructure bill that is starting to take shape in DC right now, I wanted us to spend our remaining 2 or 3 meetings this legislative session sort of planning for what is that more focused summer work going to look like, and where could we imagine wanting to drill down and put in some time and attention, and maybe connect with our congressional delegation for some details, connect with joint fiscal as the spending bumpers get outlined. Because as Chris said at the beginning of the meeting, we're looking for places where we can do that double or triple win, right? We can stimulate the economy, we can help Vermont recover from the pandemic, and oh, by the way, we can help Vermonters save money on their transportation and heating by using less fossil fuel. And so that's really the task at hand, I think. And so we wanted to open it up to thoughts and ideas about how we might focus that work, and whether there are folks among us who would be interested in offering to lead a small working group. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Does it, so we're aiming for working groups. We haven't gotten organized on exactly the timeline, and I don't know if the summer is the right timeline or the next month is the right timeline. So we got to get clear on that. But do people think it makes sense to start by agreeing on some categories? Like transportation jumps to mind. Now, you guys in the House Transportation are a creative bunch, so I don't know if you need a lot from us, but transportation would make sense to me. Sort of, I don't know, food systems would be another place that presumably some resilience and local economy and, the climate infrastructure. So I wonder if people agree that that's where we should start, is to set a few categories up and then sort of see if we can't divide them up, check in with the relevant standing committees. We don't need to step on people's toes. We want to be a value add here. Is that a smart way to go? And I can call on people, but there's a few enough, not so many of us that I think we could just have a free flowing conversation. So, Carrie.
Yeah, and if I could just add before we kind of identify the opportunities, I just want to throw out equity and justice issues as well, so that we can have a four-pronged benefit in the types of investments that we'd like to make. Do we ensure that there's equity in our decision-making and our opportunities there? So I just wanted to kind of underscore that as a critically important part of what we do. I bet you thought I would talk about resilience, but know that I just think that that's critical.
That is resilience.
That's right.
Yep.
Sarita.
Yep. And I'm just going to throw this out there because that's what I do with my ideas. But I'm just wondering if after maybe we had these focus groups and, you had a report or something, if it would be helpful to look at a regional picture, like with New England, with other surrounding New England states. They're getting a lot of money too. And, with transportation, I I just wonder if there are connections where maybe if we work together, we could even increase the efficiencies or, just implement best practices. So maybe get our ducks in order, but then maybe meet with other, states surrounding Vermont and see what they're proposing as well, and see if there's any way it would make sense for us to align or work with them or just get some good ideas from them.
It is a good idea. Anybody here have or taken the time to be part of NCEL? Okay, a couple of you. So please mind them, keep an eye on the ideas brainstorming out of there. We're not, it's hard to know again if we're dealing with our current budget year, but obviously this is going to unfold over the years to come. Tanya.
Thanks so much. I definitely also want to highlight the point that Carrie made about equity. And I sort of go back and forth as to whether it should be its own group or whether it should have be embedded in every group, because it's so impactful to everything we do. So I don't have a good idea, but I sort of am back and forth around that, but I do think it's really important. Thanks.
To me, it's a lens that hits every group. I mean, we're not going to deal with transportation without dealing with equity. We're not going to deal with building efficiency without looking at equity. So it's a very helpful reminder. I need to be convinced that it doesn't apply everywhere.
I'm not saying it doesn't apply everywhere. I'm trying to think of the most effective way to make sure that we're really bringing that focus. It 100% applies everywhere. And that's why I'm kind of going back and forth between do we have an equity group that's sort of looking at everything from an equity standpoint, or do we embed it in each group? That was kind of my challenge, because it does apply everywhere.
Right. All right, I'm going to hop to people that haven't spoken yet. So, and you keep moving when you put your hands up. Selena.
Thanks, because I actually wanted to respond to what Tanya said. I think it's worth having a separate equity working group and both end, because I just think so often we are whether it's in a workplace or a legislative context or whatever, we are equity should be embedded in everything, and it should, but without focused work and attention on that. And I know there have been good proposals are floating around. I know Senator Rahm has done some work on this. I just think having a group devoted to that feels important, and it may not connect as directly to the question of federal dollars, but could inform all of our work moving forward. So I would advocate for a separate group on that.
Okay, this is a project about federal dollars, so let's stay on that, but point taken. Emily.
I remember long ago, which might not have been that long ago, time has just been lost to me. We developed some guiding principles that were mostly focused around equity to use as a screener for any proposals we were putting together. It would definitely take me a long time to dig that up in my email, but probably could. And maybe our clerk has a better system than I do. I don't know. Don't want to put her on the spot. But I think it's helpful to connect rather than, like the idea of having a separate group that might not even be working on proposals per se, but be like a screener watchdog body to evaluate all the other proposals and add, subtract, help people navigate that on each sort of policy focus area.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can dig that up. I do see that as a filter that all of our work goes through. And I appreciate that people are interested in not losing sight of that. And so the mechanics of how we do that is a good question. Carrie, Mari, and Gabrielle, I see you, but you've all spoken several times. So Scott, I'm going to turn to you.
Shucks, thanks. I'm thinking about workforce. And of course, coming from construction, I think about, and weatherization, I think about that skill set. But there's other parts too, right? There's I don't know, line workers. There's electric car salespeople. I don't know. There's a new set of skills that need to be that are going to be required, and will also attract people the state. So I'm thinking about a group that focused on that might not be a bad idea.
So workforce as an area. Okay. Do we only have a few minutes? So I'd like to focus us and get out of here with some consensus around the topics we want to hit up. And I'm also sensitive to that people have hands up. So, and now I've got a fourth hand up. So if you have, if you're going to move us along in that direction, I'll be glad to call on you. Carrie?
Just quickly, we know that the Climate Council has been putting the work in to developing recommendations. So instead of having us go on during the summer to go in a different direction, we should certainly monitor that to ensure that we're being efficient in jumping on priorities that come out of that process.
Yep. Mari?
I'd like to see us find a way to intensify the focus in assisting municipalities in using some of this money. They're great sites for community energy projects and microgrid, and to work with transportation to get those EV charging stations in. I know my own towns some are having more success than others.
Municipal, yes.
Yeah, and schools, I guess, would be in the same category in some ways. All right, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. So I think the ask was, is this a good idea? I'll say it. I think it's a good idea. Clearly, it needs more fleshing out. I have other questions like, is this only for folks in the Climate Council? Would it make sense to ask, reach out to, Karen Horn or some industry, business representatives to get some broader thinking. And I definitely concur, to the extent that we don't reinvent the wheel, to Representative Dolan's comment. The Climate Council has just developed a series of different, unfortunately, silos. But as long as we reconnect, I think this makes a lot of sense. And I'd be happy to help out with others to try and figure out, or at least put together, I can't believe I'm offering this, but to help put together a straw proposal for people to look at in terms of what working groups might make sense if others want to tag team with me. And just one other thing with regards to equity, hopefully you all just got an email from one of my interns named Cora. It is a quick survey asking, it's trying to get at equity in terms of whether or not folks have had challenges running for public office up and down the ranks. And if you have a moment to fill that out, it would be really, really helpful as we compile these results. Thanks.
Okay, Sarita, then Selena, and then we're going to have to just wrap our meeting. Sarita?
Just tie commerce to workforce. That's all.
Okay. You're commended for a succinct suggestion. Thank you, Selena.
My proposal was more of a process one, that we take just a little more time with this than like the last 5 to 10 minutes of this meeting, and that folks we catalog these ideas. Maybe people bring, since we are meeting 2 weeks in a row now, we're going to meet next week, that people could bring further ideas to the next meeting, and we could really use that to hash out the kind of list that Gabrielle is talking about and divide people into groups, and also let people know that's the plan, so that might encourage more of our members to show up next week to really be part of the planning and conversation there. It just feels a little hasty to try to figure it out.
Yeah, to your point, Selena, we also have people who are following along, joining this meeting through YouTube, and I would guess that there are a lot of ideas out there and some good energy. So it is to our advantage that we're going to huddle again next week, and I would welcome folks to submit ideas or suggestions to us over the course of the next several days.
So I echo all that. I think what we'll do is Sarah and I will huddle and try to digest what folks have offered and break it into some categories. And just as you say, Selena, next week, look to people. I'm not sure if it'll increase participation or scare more people off, but we'll look to enlist people in categories that they want to help with. And we'll also in that time try to figure out, and it sounds like from Steve Klein that we're getting a proposal from the governor. I'll have a better sense of the Senate's posture. Are we talking about something we need to do by the end of when we pass this budget? Or are we really talking about, the work over the next 5-6 months as we come back into January? I don't know that, or both, right? Or both. So I think that's the assignment that I'm hearing us corral around, although it's still quite loose. Mike, did you have a question for us or a suggestion?
Well, a bit of an observation. I just tried to look up the Climate Council at the Agency of Natural Resources website, and I can't even come up with a link for it.
They're under the Agency of Administration.
Under Agency of Administration. Okay,
Yes,
that's why.
Suzanne Young is the chair.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So do we have, does that sound like a plan, a loose plan, but a plan? Everybody, show of hands, everybody all right with that? Okay, thank you. I took a screenshot. All of you volunteered to head up a task force, so.
You're all going to be assigned, don't worry.
No, listen, we've all got a ton of work, and so it's unfair to keep coming back to the same people, but this is the world we live in. Leslie, a fresh voice today. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. For a newbie, how do I get organized in my thinking about the work that you've already done? You did the whole statewide work. How do I learn about that?
Good question.
That's
Bob,
a great
Bob
question.
Farnham has some videos.
Our website.
Yeah, the VTClimateCaucus.org, I think, is the website. I mean, it's a good question. I could help you do it on a 20-minute phone call.
I think it would be helpful, really, if we could dig up some of our historical documents that that seem like they were created a decade ago, but actually we worked on just in the last biennium, and try to share those intentionally with the caucus to remind folks.
Yeah, we can try to pull that in. So thank you. We've thrown a lot on the table. Sarah and I and others will try to digest it and organize it a little bit and come back. And we will meet next week. And please do look around who's participated and try to pull in a few more people.
Yes, when you go back to committee, find your committee mates who are also passionate about climate, and prompt them with these questions so that we can get all ideas out on the table.
And when you're talking to your chairs, this is, again, I don't want Amy Sheldon to feel like we're crowding her out. I mean, there's a great opportunity. We want to add benefit and help people and assert some of the climate, urgency onto this money. But transportation is presumably doing the same thing. So are a bunch of committees. So do communicate that, please, because that's an important value for us. And with that, I think we will call it. I've got to get to the Senate floor. The bells are ringing if we were in the building.